Greetings and a very warm welcome to everyone. My name is Dave, and it's an absolute pleasure for me to be here to host you all for the third episode of Climate Baithak. Let me just take a moment, very briefly, to discuss why we are here. The South Asian region, which is home to nearly a quarter of world's population, is alarmingly vulnerable to the impacts of the changing climate. Young people across South Asia are at the forefronts of this evolving climate crisis. It is in this context that Climate Baithak is our platform to know about our collective challenges, where we bring our experiences from different corners of this vast region to forge a deeper sense of solidarity and understanding of our shared experiences. Throughout our series, we aim to highlight these young voices, bringing together a diverse group of passionate individuals from across South Asia who are not just witness to the kind of positive and tangible change which is already happening, but are the ones actually driving it. So, before we proceed, I would, on a personal note, like to put this up that as a part of growing youth-led climate justice movement in South Asia, we attempt to contribute to a movement that is not just about saving our planet, but also about upholding the rights and dignity of every individual who calls it home. Recent events in the West Asian region have deeply affected us, and at Climate Zero, we stand in solidarity with thousands of innocent families, vulnerable people affected by violence. We firmly stand for peace and strongly hope that this cycle of violence and destruction be broken for the sake of human dignity, safety, and well being of all involved. Without further ado, now let me take a moment to introduce our special guest for today, Mr. Pervez Ali. Pervez, first of all, before anything, he is just 20 years old. So now, in that context, you'll be able to relate his experience with the kind of amazing experience that he has. Pervez is from Gilgit Baltistan region in Pakistan. He's a climate activist and policy advisor at Germanwatch, specializing in community resilience and risk mitigation. Pervez has served as the country coordinator for Fridays for Future Pakistan from the year 2021 to 2023. He has also represented Pakistan at COPs, regional conferences, and international youth events. Additionally, he is one of the youngest youth policy advisors on extreme weather events and impact, and how those extreme weather events impact the food system. So, Pervez, once again, thank you so much for taking out time to be here. It's our absolute honor and absolute pleasure. So just to get started, I'm really curious to ask you, Parvez, since you mentioned you have experience of working with marginalized population, marginalized and vulnerable groups who are more susceptible to the changing climate and the climatic shocks such as weather events. How do you see the climate justice movement overall in Pakistan responding to these unprecedented climate crises? The impacts of which have, rather, if I'm correct to say, they have become more visible in the last few decades, if I say so. So how have the youth movements shaped themselves, and how they have responded to this kind of a unprecedented challenge? To you, Parvez.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for inviting me. So I think this question connects a lot of dots, which we think as climate activists are really important to be considered and to be, understanding, the dimensions of different youth movements, because not every movement welcomes the frontline communities, especially the indigenous communities and tribal communities. And Pakistan is one of the countries which is very diverse, and we have seen, manifold actions and a lot of mismanagement amid these few decades. There's a problem in South Asia that we don't really have the acceptance to everyone, especially for the marginalized communities, because we have seen the frontline, or I would say the leading uh, communities would come from the privileged ones. So I just give you a background how these things happen, because most of the times on international platforms and especially on national platforms, your scale has been fixed that if you know about the scientific knowledge, then you can be a good leader or a good representative. That's why you are just kept out of these inclusivities, especially on policies and other national and international forums. But they don't really understand the importance of the indigenous knowledge, the knowledge that we have we have been inherited from our ancestors and our biodiversity and nature around us. So from that thing, what I believe as a climate activist and a person who's working in the mainstream activism, that we have much more capabilities, the frontline communities and the indigenous communities who are always being, affected by climate change since 2010. I've seen a lot of these issues as being one of climate refugees as myself, that we have the capability to understand how to cope with those issues. Like I would say, I'm an expert of community resilience. So how would you define community resilience? Because most of the communities on forefront, they are not that much resilient because of the financial constraints, because of the educational stuff and other, technological developments. But what we have seen in few decades, from 2010 onwards, that the communities are empowering themselves, especially the uh, civil societies have helped them a lot to empower themselves and act against the change that's happening around. I'll give you an example that there is an idea from India to make or form or to build artificial glaciers where there was a shortage of water, or where the people faced water crisis. It was one of the very sustainable, resilient projects that I've ever seen, because if you are going to pump up some water from ground or something like that, it's not sustainable. But those people chose to be sustainable, that they wanted to bring an idea that could help them, for more than 3 to 4 decades and maybe more than that. So that's how the communities are, engaging themselves, their own ideas, their own education, especially the indigenous education, the knowledge that they have to lead their own projects and to, adapt to that situation. Because most of the adaptability processes, there is a huge gap between the policymakers, the implementation, and the people who are on the forefront. So for me, I think because I've been to most of the countries in South Asia except India, I've seen the communities which are on the forefront are not being given those privileges or those stages and those representative, privileges where they can show up their education, show up their representation, and where they can represent themselves. Especially, I followed the COP28 since day one. I've seen just one speech from an indigenous community, and that was really, I think, the basic one. I would say that was not so uh, impactful for the indigenous communities. So that's what I feel in general. And in Pakistan, if you talk about the community resilience and especially the climate activism from the frontline communities, it's not that much vivid, or I would say that much noticeable or commendable. It's because of the climate illiteracy. The scientific knowledge is much more rare there. 67 to 70%, I would say 75% of the total population is unaware of climate change. They think this is an act of God, and that's it. Because of religious extremism and other things, this is not that much popular. This climate education is not that much popular, and even the climate activism. So yeah, that's the first thing. And then again, the opportunities as well, that we people from the forefront, we don't get those opportunities to avail in, make a vivid contribution to these mainstream activism.
Thank you so much for giving us a very clear picture as to what exactly, since specifically when you mentioned that there has been a deliberate attempt to exclude, the marginalized folks. You don't see them in the mainstream conversations in decision making and policy shaping spaces. So would it be correct to say that there has been a systematic exclusion of these communities? Systematic, when I say systematic, because they are neither, since they're already living at the margins, they're already vulnerable. Even neither the state, neither the youth-led grassroots movements or civil societies or NGOs have given so much focus on their experiences, because these spaces are being predominantly dominated by the privileged folks, by people who know English. For instance, there has been experience in India where we see these majority of grassroots movements which are dealing with climate justice. I think they are mostly, this thing filled with people who are English speaking, privileged folks coming from metropolitan cities and things, and things like that. So would it be correct to say that there has been a systematic exclusion? And even if there has been a representation, since you mentioned that representation has been in a very tokenistic sense and tokenistic manner, as in, like, they just wanted them to be here, so they just call any random person without even considering whether the person's ideas or perspectives do actually represent the aspirations of the community, the indigenous communities, the marginalized communities. What do you think?
Yeah, that's truly the point that I wanted to make, because the first sentence I used, the first phrase was that there is a problem in South Asian countries, like especially India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and Nepal. I've been there. That's why I just feel that why those communities from the metropolitans, and especially for those privileged people who can speak a fluent, English, or maybe they have some connections to the management, especially the administration and bureaucracy, they get chances. They get letters from organizations which are non-governmental, or maybe the international non-governmental organizations, and then they avail the opportunities. But for us, it's really struggling that we don't really have those opportunities on our plate. We have to struggle for them, and even we struggle, we have to face a lot of other things, because there is there is a proper gap, I would say, a vivid gap, a clear gap between the privileged communities and the communities who are on the forefront. I think climate justice is something that we can achieve together, uh, not just segregating some people, or just living in a delusion that if we speak in English, or if we are just having good arguments on the basis of the scientific knowledge, then we can do good. So this we can just take example of the developed countries where they take advisories from us. They have education is coming from Germany. The birth of education is from Germany. So why do they need us to advise them on policies which are really their own? They have think tanks. They have a lot of other things. That means that inclusivity is something which is only achievable when you uh, you know draw these when you just draws these lines of where is the representation and how it should go, and how it is affecting and impacting the community. So yeah, that's the real and a good picture of what you said. But then there is one more issue, that uh, the education system in our country is a bit scattered. It's amalgamated sometimes into different thoughts of schools. Like, we have the in Hindi medium, Urdu medium, English medium, and a lot of others. So we don't get really the opportunities to understand how to be vocal about our own rights. We don't really even know how to be, and what are our own human rights, and especially on climate rights. So yeah, that's the gap between the privileged communities and the marginalized and frontline communities.
Thank you so much for putting that foot, Pervez. Just following up on the previous question, I just wanted to ask this like really short question, which is with your experience of working with Fridays for Future Pakistan. I want to know, since we already talked that this situation exists, that there is a systematic exclusion of marginalized communities. However, have there been any attempts by the youth-led organizations, specifically the ones which have deeper roots into the grassroots and at the same time which have international recognition, like the Fridays for Future? And I've also seen like at a lot of places there are specific dedicated groups for Mapa communities, most affected people and areas. So, do you think that working your experience of working with Fridays for Future, have you noticed any attempts by not just Fridays for Future but also the contemporary organizations, the budding youth-led organizations in Pakistan, to make deliberate attempts to foster inclusivity by bringing these people who are often placed at the margins and at the epicenter of these climate crisis and climate shocks to the forefronts of the movement, include them in decision making spaces, include them in the policy perspectives? I just wanted to ask this.
Yeah, that's like the you're talking about the lobbies that already exist in these kind of spaces, especially in Mapa communities. That I've been working with Fridays which are Mapa, and I was one of the delegates for COP27 as well. And I felt that one of my Indian friend was also there, and we felt like collectively that we are being a bit we were shy to tell them that this is not the real representation, and how communities should go, especially the Mapa communities, to the negotiations and other representations. But then there were a lot of other people from not the real Mapa communities, I mean the privileged communities, again giving presentations, because they had profiles. Obviously they are on TV channels and newspapers, and they would just give reference of that thing and then come again into these spaces. That's really an awkward thing to uh, bridge a scale of how a person should be selected or elected for a representation. So that's really the first experience I had. But then again, you will see a lot of things in these climate spaces. I had to leave Fridays for Future international group just because of one of the misunderstandings that we encountered at COP27, and everyone just there is creating his own lobby or her own lobby, and then trying to bring them up and cheer them up. That's the problem. That's I guess a universal problem even in the international platforms and especially in the national ones. But for us, Fridays for Future Pakistan was really a diversified group in the beginning. uh, I was one of the co-founders, and then because I was just a kid, so I was not really given the opportunity to be on the forefront. But again, it was really a diversified group in 2018. And then one of our founders and co-founders, they were really supportive. Wherever they would go, they would just come back with good representation and notes and stuff. So it was really coherent between the activists, the members, and the leading board. But now I think, as I left Fridays Future, I don't really have the bigger image of it. But right now there are some conflicts between the regional chapters and the national chapters. This is always a big conflict between the regional ones and the provincial ones and the national one, because there is no coherence, and because of the financial constraints in national and then the provincial ones, there is always a bit of problem for the frontline community, especially because we are the ones who have to be vocal, who have to be giving the representations. So yeah, that's not for everyone, but for ourselves. We at least need to speak for ourselves, and we at least demand for the places, for the forums, and for the conferences to speak for ourselves.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, Parvez, because I think it's really important for us as climate justice organizers and activists to see the whole scenario from an intersectional lens in a way that we need to ask some really important questions. For instance, who are the marginalized folks that we are dealing with? What kind of vulnerabilities do people belonging to these underprivileged and vulnerable communities have? So I think we also need to ask how visible these groups are. For instance, we know that there is this representation of, say, like climate refugees in these forums, maybe of people belonging to gender sexual minorities. But we actually need to say, in actual tangible terms, how much visibility do these people get apart from these tokenistic once in a while representation? So this also brings us to a very important intersection. I think this intersection which emerges from this conversation is also about loss and damage. Since you mentioned about finance, we'll also come to that in the later part of the conversation. So the
Hmm.
loss and damage which has already occurred, it has, I think, in most of the South Asian countries, or even in the global South, it has gone unnoticed. It is not documented. It is under researched. And I think in recently itself, Pakistan was very severely affected by rampant floods, which caused immense loss. And I read it somewhere that it possibly affected more than 33 million people. And surprisingly, half of those people were children, leaving people bereft of clean water, sanitation, safe shelter, and even severely impacting the ecology and the economy. So how do you see that the adaptation and resilience building efforts which are going on in South Asia and with respect to Pakistan too? How do you see that these amidst this kind of a situation, these kind of climate shocks and the kind of vulnerability which our region has, how they are shaping themselves? As a person who is working in climate resilience field yourself, how do you think that the whole narrative around loss and damage and further about climate finance is being shaped by these resilience and adaptation efforts? To you,
All
Purvis.
right, yeah. Uh, like losses and the damages that we have faced are really immense, obviously, and then they have been put on international and national platforms. But right now, the funds for loss and damage are being, accepted, and there are a lot of other things, rumors around that there is a conspiracy to politicize the funds and a different name and stuff. So it's really hectic and confusing at the moment. But I would say the civil societies could make a better impact rather than the governments, because recently we were making the CCPI report, which is the Climate Change Policy Index, where my country is standing at 30th position, and the policy that we give is was rated very low, and especially the renewables were really low. So from those pictures, you can reflect that how a country which is vulnerable and stands at sixth position to be the most vulnerable country from climate change is dealing with its policies, and uh, what are their future plans, especially to the GST, global stock tech right now. And then again, uh, you can write whatever you want in the indices, but again, when you go to the GST and when you are, asking for the funds for loss and damage, then you have to be really credible about those things. So what I believe in global South, especially in Asia, especially South Asia, is that we have a really clear picture of a contradiction between the policies that we have on paper and the policies that are being implemented on ground. That's why we lose these conversations when we are in negotiations, even where we have to represent our community and say that we have, first supposedly we have, if Pakistan lost 345 billion US dollars from their economy just because of climate change, then they would have to reflect those things in the policies as well. 18,000 schools were damaged last year. 18,000 schools were damaged. I was out of schools for 7 months in 2010 when my school was damaged. So I know the pain and I know how a person feels when he is out of school and when he is a refugee for a certain, a period of time. But I would blame the government and the administration and the bureaucracy for their pre-disaster management. That's the biggest loophole in our system, that we don't do the pre-disaster management and we wait for the post one just because of the kickbacks, and there are a lot of other things. So the government should be resilient more than the communities. Then the communities will get empowered. If you are just focusing on your communities and saying that you have to be resilient, that's not going to work. Even if you have the finances, it's not going to work. You must have a plan. That right now, there's a fund from Global Climate Fund, which is, I guess, $43 million, which was given to Ministry of Climate Change and the WWF Pakistan. They are working on Indus River project, but really their plan is not so vivid for the frontline communities. It's again for their own interest, for the interest of water security, for the interest of hydropower and other things. You're well aware of the people who are on the forefront in Gilgit Baltistan, in KP, and Balochistan, and Sindh, and everywhere. So you have to empower your community either, or empower your society, which really is important. I would say the organizations which are working for community resilience, adaptation, risk mitigation, and other aspects. You have to empower them first. You have to give them a free hand. In Pakistan, we don't really have those policies where they would give free hand to the civil society. So yeah, that's one thing, and the other is when you are empowering your community, then you would have to follow their trends, their traits, their indigenousness, their tribalness, not just go with some scientific, or some technological changes in those areas. Just go with their own flow, and then it could be more easy to grasp their attention and to make them comfortable around and to adapt to that situation, rather than going just building a lot of things around there and giving them some solutions which are not even uh, you know which are out of their league. So yeah, that's I think most important.
Parvez, you also mentioned that somehow you've noticed, or out of your experience, you know that civil societies are occasionally more better in terms of maybe providing the kind of resources and adaptation capacity building which is required at the grassroots level. However, we also talked about climate finance to an extent. And since we already touched on it very slightly, how do you view the accessibility of these very crucial development funds for grassroots organizations and youth led climate justice movements in Pakistan? And for instance, in India, for financial support for such movements is very scarce. And when we have to often rely 100% on voluntary efforts of young people coming together, forming unions and doing all sorts of efforts. And how do you think that this situation, when compared with Pakistan, in what ways do you agree with this kind of a scarcity of availability of funds, and how do you think that these lack of funds and the paucity of resources which these young movements and grassroots organizations have, how does that in access of these funds affect their progress in the longer run? To you, Parvez.
Uh, I think there is again there's a gap between the civil society and the government organizations, especially the bureaucracy, because the bureaucracy is really slow in our region, especially in South Asia, because you are dependent on the bureaucracy for the funds, especially, and because there is like a formality to, you know, uh, make the flow of the fund through the bureaucracy, and then the approvals and a lot of other things. There is some hectic formality when you go for funds, especially for the youth movements. And what we have experienced, I've been working with UNDP and UNICEF in Pakistan as well. Even their projects, like the Glove 2 project and other projects, the biodiversity project, the conservation project, they have to go through a lot of things. And I've heard a lot of gossips around how the bureaucracy is a big problem for them in Pakistan as well. So if international organizations and organizations which they have their own funds are struggling, then you can give it a guess that how the organizations which are community based or youth based are struggling there for the funds. Uh, we had a recent we had a call recently with the Minister for Youth Affairs, and we were putting a suggestion in front of him, and he pledged somehow that why don't just institutionalize all the youth movements in Pakistan, and then just to give them a space to get funds, not from the government, but we have a lot of other contacts outside as well. Like we get funds from the GIZ in Germany, we get funds from Netherlands embassy and a lot of other things, but we don't really have the access to those funds. We get them, but don't have the access because of the bureaucracy stuff and other formalities, and the security clearance and other things. So we are just, we try to convince them, if you just institutionalize the youth here, then we can make a difference, because 62% of the population is under 30 in Pakistan right now. So it's totally youth everywhere. Young generation can bring a change. So tomorrow the seats are ours, the decision making seats are ours. So why not to prepare from today? And that's one thing. And the other aspect of this is the flow of funds is not sufficient for the youth NGOs and the civil society as well. Other civil society, I mean, not only the youth one. It's because the financial crisis in the country, and then we again go for the demands from the loss and damage. Recently, we had a meeting with UN Secretary General on this thing, that how UNFCCC can make these funds accessible and more convenient for the youth NGOs and youth representatives from different country to grasp a better grip on representation and giving recommendations and be on the presidential forums. So yeah, that's the background of it, and it really is, when we talk about the finance, it really is not the easiest way to go for uh, developments. Rather, just go for some volunteer work and just contribute the way you can and as much as you can. So yeah, that's
So even when it comes to climate finance, I heard somewhere, or rather I read somewhere, that most of these funds often are coming from the global north to the global south, and it is to a very great extent these funds have capacity to shape and direct the movements running in the global south, which also in turn can possibly lead to the neglection of the local conditions, the kind of the traditional way of living which people have, and the kind of problems which people really face at the grassroots level. They only work on a very on a very touchstone kind of a method, tokenistic method. So I think that is one problem we have with respect to climate finance, not just in Pakistan but across South Asia. If I'll be correct to say so, because I spoke with my Bangladeshi counterparts as well, and they talked about it. And then comes the institutionalizing the NGOs which are running. For instance, in Bangladesh, they face a lot of difficulty with respect to it getting the NGOs registered, since there is a lot of bribery, not just in Bangladesh, but that's something we face in India, and I'm pretty sure we must face that
yeah.
in South Asia as well. So that's also another very difficult part. So now I wanted to hear, since we've been talking about climate finance, we've been talking about the inclusion of marginalized and vulnerable communities within the mainstream climate justice movement. Now I wanted to hear from you, what do you think are some critical aspects with respect to climate change mitigation, where the young leaders and organizers and climate justice activists have a overall consensus in terms of the kind of outcomes that we are, expecting from this movement. I mean, whether it's maybe bringing a policy transformation with respect to how our state and governments have responded, or maybe it can mean reaching climate net zero targets, or it can mean even adapting to the technology and AI to maybe better help restore our ecology. All sorts of nuances to it. But what do you think, as per you, can be an overall consensus position with respect to achieving out of this climate justice movement?
Okay, so this really is a recent topic for me because we there's an Asian Youth for Asian Youth Empowerment for COP. There is an organization which is basically for the Asian youth for the COP, and we were discussing this in the meeting that how can we make a common consensus on some of the points where we can advocate for these and go with a very vocal approach to the COP, and especially it's in Dubai, so it was not really making sense to be politically active because the environment of and atmosphere of Dubai. So the first thing we agreed upon was the REs, I mean the renewable energy, which India is on the forefront right now. They are really amazing in renewable energy, but in Pakistan there is a contradictory decision not to allow renewable energies to be imported in the country, and that's just because the private companies, the private energy companies are getting more profits from the community. I mean, that's just insane that you don't allow your businesses to be more clean and more renewable just to earn profits, and it's just a small scale. I mean, we are not big contributors. We don't have the big chunk to contribute in GHGs, especially in carbons. But again, you have to be really, confident on your own actions that we just go uh, net zero by 2035 or 2040 because you are not really contributing to the global emissions. So you have the target really, near you. First thing is the renewable energies, and then again, the climate finance is really important because in COP27, this was a big discussion that India would need to pay if loss and damage fund will exist. But right now, we have seen that it's not happening because of the misconceptions of the institutions and the institutional representations. These things are really contradictory for the countries. Why not a coalition or a coherent, perspective from Asia, if that can be in Bonn, the SB, if that can be the MENA regions conference, if that can be the American conference, why not an Asian conference of climate change and get on track with your, demands and especially your plannings. So the first thing, again, renewables. Second, the finance and the policy is very important because without policies, without vivid policies on how you're gonna, institutionalize your NGOs, your youth, your businesses, especially, giving them the free hand to be renewable or clean. That's what we think was important. And especially people from Bangladesh, they were really optimistic about this because there are more NGOs than, I guess, there are more NGOs than Pakistan, India, and especially Nepal. It's a country which is run by civil society. They were really optimistic that maybe we can achieve this. But for us, Pakistan, the picture is a bit different. So first, we have to build a coherence in Asia. If youth is empowered, then we can do this. First, we have to empower the youth. We have to give them the necessity of the representation, and then we have to give them the knowledge. We have to capacitate them, and then we can, build a community from Asia, and then we can make a bold voice from Asia and come to the COPs and other conferences where we can represent our areas much more uh, effectively. And yeah, that's I think my point on this.
Absolutely, I agree. Because with respect to the kind of collaboration which is possible among the South Asian countries, I think there is no established nodal place to go where all of us can connect and try to share solidarity among ourselves and try to share the best practices, the challenges. So we were also thinking in terms of creating a South Asian youth mentorship board where all the leaders and all the grassroots activists and organizers come together and try to help these budding movements, the budding climate justice organizers and activists and the grassroots organizations, so that they can function better. However, that is something I'll also discuss towards the end of this whole session. However, my last few questions for you would be: what is your idea of development for your country? For instance, when we talk about Pakistan, and what do you think that what do you think? Do you think that the other climate justice organizers and activists would have the similar version of the ideas of development that they have for their nation? What do you understand by development, and do you also believe in the contemporary notions of degrowth and going slower on the development because it's anyways unsustainable? So what do you think?
No, I think sustainability is the indigenousness of the people. I think sustainability is the growth of the people, is the happiness and good livelihoods of the people. I think development is not something that you have achieved in just 3 years and you have targets of achieving much more finance and be a growing economy. I think and the economy is much more important as well. But what development is for me it's like the sustainability. If you are developing sustainably, then it makes sense to a climate activist or for a person who is really connected to the nature and really connected to the mountains and stuff, and as a climate activist. And I think this really is an idea, or I would say a notion of everyone in the climate space in Pakistan, that we need sustainable development, not only just go for industries and stuff. And we are also against the CPEC project that's going right through the heart of Gilgit Baltistan, which is just the home of glaciers and the only water source of Pakistan, I would say. And then I think that really is an idea for every single person who's living in South Asia, because we have a different biodiversity, we have a different, strategic importance to the world. That we have glaciers on our head and we have oceans in our feet. So that's how I think a country should act. That just keep your priorities sustainably on the forefront, and then go for the development, not just only go for industrialization and other stuff, and just make your people happy. And for me, it's like the indigenousness of my people, that they are really free to move around, because climate change brings migration, and migration brings takes away your roots from you, your tribal roots, your indigenous roots, and your happiness and everything, your connectiveness with your land and your nature, your biodiversity. So yeah, that's I think.
Thank you so much for putting that forth. With this, Pervez, I think we have come to an end of all the questions that I needed you to ask, for me to ask. And I also mentioned about the South Asian Youth Mentorship Board, which I just mentioned. I'll just give you a brief idea about it. Towards the end of this whole series, we plan to creating a kind of a platform named South Asian Youth Mentorship Body for Climate Action, which we aim to bring together a diverse group of passionate climate justice activists and organizers from across South Asia, so that we can empower emerging organizations, activists, and collectives with the kind of guidance and support and tools and resources which we, people like you and I, and the organizations like the contemporary organizations can provide. And we see it more than just a network. We see it as a community dedicated to nurturing the next wave of climate action leaders in South Asia. So we would be very, very willing to have your support in this. Since we have been asking this to every guest who has joined the Climate Baithak session, I just wanted to put this forth. I think this can be a great way where we can contribute in fostering that inter-regional solidarity. I think that doesn't exist as much as it does for the Southeast Asian regions. I think in South Asia we still need a lot of cohesion, solidarity with kind of the efforts that we are doing. So yeah, just wanted to inform you about that. Any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think that's the most important thing that I've seen in years, that we don't really have the coherence, and we don't really have the common consensus on how can we move forward as a youth, movement from South Asia, and especially from those countries which are really, connected to each other. Supposedly we have uh, cultural, and we have lingual and other, I'd say, connections with our countries, especially India and Pakistan. We have been one, and we were one, and we have been, in conflicts, and then again, we have love for each other. So I think this could be one of the best, I would say, initiatives where we can just build a community and then represent our people. Like, individual approach is never a good approach, and is never something worth considering. For me, I'd say, it's just my personal opinion that collective decisions, collective approach, and collective movements can build, communities, and can bring a change. So yeah, that really is an awesome idea, and I would be more than happier to, uh, contribute my time and contribute my expertise to this movement. Yeah.
Lovely, lovely. Thank you so much for extending this support. We truly appreciate it, and we truly appreciate the kind of time that you've taken to be present in today's interview discussion. My team would be reaching out with respect to the South Asian Youth Mentorship Body in the coming weeks. And again, thanks a lot. And with this, we end today's live in solidarity. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.